early morning in Liberty, Ohio, was cold and gray, as if the town itself had frozen, awaiting the storm that was about to break over its quiet streets. Mist drifted along Main Street, cloaking the old brick buildings with peeling paint, the faded diner signs, and a solitary traffic light blinking yellow in the pre-dawn silence. In the living room of Michael Davis, a 48-year-old man with tired eyes and wrinkles that spoke of years of disappointment and loneliness, the silence was broken only by the ticking of an old pendulum clock, inherited from his mother. Michael sat at a wooden table, worn by time, clutching a coffee mug with the faded logo of the local baseball team, the Liberty Lions. The mug was as battered as his memories, and the warm coffee had long since gone cold, leaving a bitter taste. On the table stood a photograph in a cracked wooden frame. Michael at 16, with long hair and a cheeky grin, embracing his father, Jack, mother, Marge, and younger sister, Emily. They stood before the family farm, a red barn with flaking paint, cornfields swaying in the wind, an apple orchard perfuming the autumn air with the sweet scent of ripe fruit. Their smiles looked genuine, but Michael knew that behind them lay a story full of unspoken words, resentments, and fractures he never managed to mend, despite all his efforts. Michael always kept everything to himself. People in Liberty said of him, the kind of town where everyone knew everyone, and gossip spread faster than the wind. In school, he was the guy who didn't complain, even when he broke his arm on the football field during a game against the neighboring town of Urbana, or when his father chastised him for sneaking off with friends to Lake Erie, where they built bonfires, drank cheap beer, and dreamed of life beyond Liberty. He was used to coping on his own, swallowing his grievances like bitter pills, and moving forward without looking back. But last night his world shattered, like old glass struck by a hammer. Bobby Clark, a school friend now working as a lawyer in Columbus, called him. His office downtown was cluttered with folders and reeking of cheap coffee from a 24-hour diner. Bobby's voice was heavy, as if he feared his own words. "Mike, you need to know, your parents rewrote their wills before they died. Everything went to Emily. The house, the farm, the savings, about $500,000. Your name isn't even mentioned." Michael froze, gripping the phone until his fingers turned white. Jack and Marge had died 3 years ago in a car crash on a slick road near Liberty, returning from a farmer's market in a nearby town. He thought their affairs were settled long ago, that the inheritance had been divided equally, just as his parents had promised during dinners in their old kitchen with its floral curtains. But Bobby continued, lowering his voice to a whisper. "And that's not all, Mike. Emily did something strange. You should come to Liberty and figure it out." Michael set the mug down. Coffee sloshed across the table, leaving a dark stain on the tablecloth he never changed after Kate left. He ran a hand through his hair, where gray had long since replaced the dark strands, and felt his chest tighten as if someone were squeezing his heart. He hadn't seen Emily in nearly a decade. After leaving for Chicago right after high school to build a career in a construction company, the bond with his family began to fray like an old rope worn by time and distance. Emily had stayed in Liberty with their parents. She had been there when their father started coughing from years of farm dust, when their mother forgot neighbors' names, mixed up days of the week, and left the kettle on the stove. Michael called on Thanksgiving, sent Christmas cards, occasionally wired money for their prescriptions, but each time felt the distance between them grow, cold and insurmountable. She was always their favorite, he thought, remembering how Marge praised Emily for straight A's at school, her work at the local library helping children with homework, and her kind heart, as their mother liked to say, holding her up as an example. Emily was the daughter who stayed, who didn't argue or rebel. Michael was different. He argued with his father, ran off with friends to the lake, refused to wake up at 5 to milk cows or fix fences on the farm. He wanted freedom, wanted to prove he could succeed on his own, without the family land, without the smell of hay, without the weight of the tractor. Maybe they never forgave me for leaving, he wondered as he stared at the photo, his youthful face so carefree and naive, full of hope for a future he had pictured so differently. He got up and went to the window. His Chicago suburban home was modest but cozy. A white picket fence overtaken by weeds, a small garden with dried-up roses he never learned to care for after his divorce from Kate. The street was quiet, only a neighbor's dog barking in the distance and the mailman tossing the newspaper on the porch, missing the mat as always. Michael closed his eyes and drifted back to the liberty of his childhood. He remembered the smell of freshly cut hay that filled the summer air, the creak of the wooden porch on the farmhouse, his father shouting, "Michael, bring the tools! Stop loafing!" He recalled how Emily, still a little girl with oversized glasses, ran after him through the fields, her braids bouncing as he lifted her high, and how they built blanket forts in the living room, stretched them over chairs, and watched Star Wars on an old, static-filled TV while their mother baked apple pie, filling the house with warm cinnamon fragrance. Michael was her protector. He shooed away bullies who teased her for her glasses, taught her to ride a bike by holding the frame, even when she fell and cried, cutting her knees. He remembered the stormy night when Emily climbed into his bed, trembling with fear, and he told her pirate stories until she fell asleep, curled against his chest. He remembered sneaking apples from the orchard together, giggling until their father caught them, wagging a finger, but his eyes were laughing. But everything changed when he left. Emily stayed behind, and he became a stranger to the family, as if silence had taken his place, cold and heavy. Michael returned to the table. His fingers tapped the worn tabletop, leaving marks on the dusty surface. He'd built a life in Chicago, risen to manager at a construction firm, overseen projects, built shopping centers and office buildings that now towered over the city as proof of his success. He married Kate, a school teacher with a gentle smile, who loved books and dreamed of having children. They bought a house overlooking Lake Michigan, planned a future, spoke of children, trips to the shoreline, of Christmas times with family. But the marriage fell apart 5 years ago. Kate wanted a family. Michael was too consumed by work, meetings, blueprints, deadlines. They drifted apart like two ships sailing divergent courses. Kate left, leaving him with the mortgage and emptiness in a house too big for one person. Now his life consisted of mortgage payments, bills, solo dinners in front of the TV, endless reruns of baseball games. He remembered how Kate once said, "You're living as if you're running away from something." At the time he brushed it off, but now her words echoed in his mind. Had he been running? From liberty? From his family? From himself? Learning about the will, he felt that everything he had built, home, career, independence, mattered for nothing. His parents had chosen Emily. They'd crossed him out as if he'd never been their son, as if all those years of calls, letters, attempts to be part of their lives had meant nothing. He grabbed the phone and dialed Bobby. "Tell me everything you know," he said, trying to keep his voice steady, though anger and pain roiled inside. He grabbed the phone and dialed Bobby. Bobby sighed, and Michael imagined him in his cramped office, surrounded by files, coffee cups, and old newspapers smelling of ink. "Your parents rewrote their wills a month before the accident," Bobby began. "I found the documents while going through old paperwork. They left Emily the house, the farm, all the savings, about $500,000. Your name isn't mentioned. But Mike, that's not all. Emily sold the farm 6 months after their deaths, and not just sold, She gave it to a company linked to her new husband at half its value. I checked it out. It smells like fraud. The company belongs to Trevor Hayes, her husband. They got married shortly after your parents died. Michael felt blood rush to his face, his heart pounding like it wanted to burst from his chest. The Davis farm had been in the family for 3 generations. His grandfather bought the land when Liberty was still a dirt road village with just a handful of shops. His father, Jack, had been proud of every harvest, every ear of corn, every apple from their orchard. Michael remembered running through the fields as a child, his father teaching him to fix the old tractor, his mother canning apples and carefully labeling each jar with the date in the basement pantry. He didn't want to work on the farm, didn't want to wake at dawn to plow, but he always thought the farm was part of his story, part of who he was. Then Emily, his younger sister, had sold the whole thing to a company tied to her husband. "Bobby, are you sure?" he asked, his phone-holding hand white-knuckled. "Could she really do that?" Bobby answered, "I don't know, Mike, but she didn't tell you. And there's more. She's living in a big house on the edge of Liberty. Bought it right after selling the farm. People say she's become a big figure in town, doing charity work, sitting on the town council, hosting events." Michael hung up and sat, staring at the photo. His thoughts were tangled like wires in the old barn where he once hid from his father after an argument. He remembered Emily in childhood, running to him scared of thunder. How they stole cookies from the jar while Mom wasn't watching. How he taught her to ride a bike, holding the frame until she could balance. He remembered her sobbing when he left for Chicago, her glasses fogged with tears, asking him, "Will you come back, Michael?" He'd promised, but hadn't kept the promise. She stopped answering his calls, stopped visiting. And now, this. He felt betrayed, but most of all, he was tormented by the question, why? Why had his parents chosen her? And what had she really done after he left their lives? Michael decided it was time to return to Liberty. He packed a bag, throwing in a pair of jeans, a few shirts, an old Cleveland Indians baseball cap, and the family photo, just in case. The drive from Chicago to Liberty took about 5 hours. He drove along the highway, the skyscrapers of Chicago giving way to suburbs of neat houses, then farms and small towns with gas stations and diners serving burgers and milkshakes. His mind drifted back. He remembered his father saying, "Family is everything, Michael. You'll understand when you grow up." Michael laughed then, believing freedom was more important. He wanted to prove he could succeed without the farm, without Liberty. And he did, managing projects, constructing buildings, earning enough to buy a home by Lake Michigan. But returning to an empty house after the divorce, he felt the void. Work didn't fill it. He remembered Kate's words echoing in his mind. "You're living like you're running away from something." He'd shrugged it off, but now felt the truth. Liberty greeted him with familiar scents: fresh-cut grass, coffee from Marge's diner, barbecue smoke drifting nearby. The town hadn't changed much. The same faded signs on Main Street, the same old movie theater where he'd kissed a girl in 8th grade, the same park where he and Emily rode the carousel laughing until tears. Michael stopped at the Starlight Motel on the edge of town, into a room smelling of mildew, stains on the carpet, and old TV showing only 3 snowy channels. He dropped his bag on the bed and looked in the mirror. A face lined with wrinkles, eyes that had seen too many disappointments. He decided to meet with Bobby first. In the lawyer's cluttered office, Bobby showed him the will. "Here's black on white," Bobby said. "Jack and Marge signed this in front of a notary. Your name is crossed out." Michael flipped through the pages, feeling his chest tighten. The paper smelled of age, as if it held all their family's secrets. He asked, "Did they leave any explanation?" Bobby shook his head. "Nothing. Just that Emily was with them when they were sick, Maybe they decided she deserved more. Michael left the office and sat in his car. He remembered how his mother had called him in Chicago, asking him to come when his father got worse. He'd come a couple of times, but work always dragged him back. Emily had stayed, cooked for them, drove them to appointments, read to them in the evenings while their father watched baseball. I thought she did it out of love, he thought, turning the steering wheel. But now, he wasn't sure. Sell the farm at half price? That's not like the Emily he knew. Or maybe he'd never truly known her. He drove to her new house, a large mansion with white columns, surrounded by a manicured lawn and pink rose bushes that appeared to be watered obsessively. This wasn't the Liberty he remembered. This house screamed money, status, a life he never strived for. Michael parked and sat in the car for a few minutes, gathering himself. His heart raced like a teenager facing his father after a fight. He wasn't ready for this meeting, but he knew he had to look Emily in the eyes. He rang the doorbell, and she opened almost immediately. Emily was 42 now, but looked younger. Neat hair, an expensive cashmere sweater, a smile that seemed overly rehearsed. "Michael! My God, it's been years!" she said. But her voice trembled as if she were afraid. Michael studied her, trying to tell whether she was happy to see him or scared. He said, "Emily, we need to talk. About the will, about the farm." Emily turned pale, but invited him in. The living room was magazine-worthy. Leather sofas, gold-framed paintings, a crystal chandelier casting glimmers across the walls. Michael felt like a stranger, as if he'd walked into someone else's life. He sat on the edge of the sofa, baseball cap in his tightly clenched hands. He began, "I found out your parents left everything to you, house, farm, money, and then you sold the farm. At half price, Emily, to a company linked to your husband. Explain what's going on." She averted her gaze, her fingers nervously twisting the edge of her sweater. "Michael, you don't understand," she said in a quiet whisper. "You left. You abandoned us. I was the one who cared for them. I was there when they died. I earned this." Michael felt anger rise in his chest, but held himself back. "Earned? And what about me? I was their son. Why did they cut me out? And why didn't you tell me the truth about the farm?" Emily stood and walked to the window, looking at her perfect lawn. Her shoulders trembled, but she remained silent, as though searching for words. Michael waited as the silence grew unbearable. He remembered how as children they shared secrets, how she trusted him with her fears and her dream of becoming a writer. But now she was different, a stranger in a nice house, hiding something. Finally, she turned. Her eyes glistened with tears, but there was something else in them. Fear, guilt, maybe shame. "They believed you wouldn't come back," she said, her voice shaking. "That you didn't need family. I didn't want it to happen like this." Michael watched her, feeling his heart tighten. He asked, "Emily, what did you do after I left? What did you do with the farm? And why did you hide it from me?" She lowered her head, her fists clenched. "Michael," she whispered, "I didn't want you to find out." Her voice broke, and in that moment Michael realized the truth he was seeking might be heavier than he was ready to bear. Silence in Emily's living room was heavy, like the air just before a thunderstorm descending on Liberty, Ohio. Michael Davis sat on the edge of the leather sofa, fingers clutching the faded Cleveland Indians cap, eyes fixed on his sister. Emily stood by the vast panoramic window, gazing at the perfect lawn bordered with rose bushes, watered with manic precision. Her shoulders trembled, her fingers nervously twisted the hem of the expensive cashmere sweater, and her words, "Michael, I didn't want you to find out," hung in the air like the echo of distant thunder. Michael felt anger, pain, and bewilderment warring inside him, but forced himself to speak calmly, though his voice shook with tension. "Emily, I deserve the truth. What did you do with the farm? Why did you hide this from me all these years? I'm your brother. I had the right to know." Emily slowly turned. Her eyes glistened with tears, yet there was something new in them, a mixture of resolve and exhaustion, as if she had borne this burden too long and it had crushed her. She took a deep breath, her arms falling to her sides, and said, "Michael, you left. You abandoned us when I was 18. I stayed with Mom and Dad, their illnesses, their fears, their endless medical bills. You called once a year, sent Christmas cards, sometimes wired a couple $100, but you weren't here. I was." Her voice trembled, but held the resentment that had gathered over the years like dust in an old farmhouse. Michael wanted to argue that he had tried to be part of their lives, that he had his own struggles in Chicago, work, divorce, loneliness, but the words stuck in his throat. He remembered his mother calling him during her final years, her voice weak, almost pleading. "Mike, come home. Dad's worse." He had come a few times, sat by his father's bedside, listened to his rasping cough, but each time he rushed back to his blueprints, his projects, his dreams of the big city, which had once seemed more important than anything. Emily, on the other hand, had been there, every day, every hour, changing bedding, driving their parents to doctor appointments, listening as their mother forgot her name and their father cursed his weakness. She continued, her voice firmer, as if she was finally ready to reveal everything that had built up inside her. "When they died, I was in shock. The will, I didn't ask them for it. They decided on their own. Mom told me a week before the crash. We were in the kitchen. She held a cup of tea, her hands trembling like aspen leaves. She said you wouldn't come back, that you chose your life in Chicago, that the farm should stay with whoever would care for it, whoever would remain in liberty." I tried to argue, Michael, I swear. I told her it wasn't fair, that you were their son, that you deserved your share. But she just shook her head and said, "Emily, he made his choice." Michael felt his face flush as though he'd been struck. He stood, his voice grew loud, shaking with rage. "Care? Emily, you sold the farm, for half its value, to your husband's company. You call that caring for the farm? For our family? You betrayed them. You betrayed us." Emily flinched, as though his words were a physical blow. She turned away, her fingers curling into fists, her nails digging into her palms, leaving red marks. "You don't know the whole story, Michael," she whispered, her voice barely audible like wind rustling through cornfields. Michael began pacing the living room. His footsteps echoed softly on the polished wood floor, reflecting off high walls adorned with paintings in gilt frames and a crystal chandelier that threw mocking glints over his pain. He remembered the farm, the red barn, creaking in the wind, the smell of damp earth after a rain, the apple trees his father pruned every spring, grumbling but with pride. He recalled childhood days, he and Emily running through the fields, her laughter as he lifted her to pick apples from the highest branch, the makeshift shelter of branches by the creek, Emily reading him her early stories from a battered notebook, dreaming of becoming a writer. He remembered when she was 10, falling off her bike and scraping her knees, and he carried her home in his arms as she sobbed against his shoulder. "That farm was our story, Emily," he said, voice cracking with anger and grief. "Our families. Great-grandpa plowed this land when liberty was only a village. Dad lived for it, woke at dawn to fix the tractor, plant corn even when his back gave out. Mom canned apples, and the whole house smelled like cinnamon. And you just sold it? For that house? For your husband? For this life that looks nothing like liberty? Emily turned to him. Her face was pale, but her eyes blazed as though she could no longer restrain herself. "You think it was easy?" she shouted, tears shaking her voice. "You think I wanted this? I didn't know what to do, Michael. The farm was in debt. Dad had hidden it from us. I tried to save it, but couldn't. Trevor, he offered a way out." Michael paused, breath heavy as though he'd run a mile. "Trevor? Your husband? The one whose company bought the farm at half its value?" He felt anger morph into something deeper, distrust entwined with pain, like someone had torn the last thread bonding him to his family. Emily nodded, voice quieter, almost pleading. "Yes, Trevor. He said his company could buy the farm to cover the debts. I didn't know it would end like this. I thought it was temporary, that we could buy it back, but everything changed." She fell silent, eyes dropping to the floor as if unable to meet his accusing, hurt-filled gaze. Michael recalled that Bobby Clark mentioned Trevor Hayes, Emily's husband, about whom he knew almost nothing. They married soon after their parents' death, and Michael hadn't even been invited to the wedding. He recalled Emily's disappearing replies to his calls, her messages growing shorter until they stopped altogether. 4 years ago, he wrote her a long letter, asking how she was, offering to come to Liberty, but got no reply. He thought she was just busy, coping, but now he saw she'd been drowning, and he hadn't noticed. "Emily," he said, trying to steady his voice, "what do you mean by everything changed? What are you hiding? And why didn't you tell me? I was your brother. I could have helped." Emily shook her head, lips quivering, as though battling tears. "You weren't here, Michael. You don't know what it was like. I didn't want to drag you into this. You were living your life, and I thought you didn't care." The words hit him like a slap. Michael felt his anger dissolve into guilt he'd long suppressed. He remembered promising to prove himself in Chicago after the fight with Jack, the one where his father shouted, "You think the city will make you better than us?" And he left without looking back, slamming the door. He had thought he was right. He became a construction manager, built skyscrapers, bought a Lakeview home. But now, standing in Emily's living room, surrounded by her new life, leather sofas, paintings, chandelier, he felt it all was empty. His parents chose Emily, and did she betray them? Or maybe he had betrayed them, and maybe him too. That uncertainty shredded him from within. Michael sat back on the sofa. His hands shook like he held something fragile. He looked at Emily, her pale face, tear-filled eyes, and asked, "Emily, tell me everything. What debts? Why did you trust Trevor? And what did you do with the farm's money? This house. It's not Liberty. Where did all this come from?" Emily looked at him, eyes filled with pain, but she remained silent as if her words were trapped inside her, locked away by fear. Finally, she whispered, "Michael, it's complicated. Father, he'd taken loans to keep the farm afloat. I found the papers after their deaths, in his old desk. We owed the bank nearly $200,000. I didn't know how to deal with it. I tried running the farm, but the crops failed, the equipment broke, and I was alone. Trevor, he was the only one who offered help. He seemed like salvation. But then, I learned things I shouldn't have known." She trailed off, voice breaking. and Michael felt a chill run down his spine. "What kind of things?" he asked, leaning forward, voice tense, nearly menacing. Emily shook her head, hands trembling as though afraid the house itself would hear her confession. "I can't tell you. Not now." Michael rose, patience snapped like an over-tight string. "Enough, Emily." His voice reverberated off the walls, making the chandelier clink faintly. "I came here for the truth. You sold our farm, you live in this house as if nothing happened, and I'm left with nothing. I deserve to know what happened. If you won't tell me, I'll find the answers myself, whatever it takes." Emily stepped back, her face contorting with pain as if his words were tearing her apart. "Do you think it was easy?" she cried, tears now streaking her cheeks. "Do you think I wanted this? I lost them just like you. But I was the one left behind, cleaning up after them, watching them die. I sat by Mom's bed when she forgot my name. I held Dad's hand as he struggled to breathe. And where were you, Michael? In Chicago, building skyscrapers, while I buried our parents." Her words hung heavy in the air like stones, and Michael felt his anger dissolve into guilt he'd long ignored. He remembered learning of their death from Bobby's brief message, because Emily hadn't called. He recalled standing at their funeral feeling like a stranger, among neighbors whispering behind his back. He abandoned them. He ran off to the city. He sank back onto the sofa, shoulders drooping as if all his rage had drained away, leaving only exhaustion and emptiness. "Emily," he said softly, voice hoarse from sleepless nights. "I didn't know. I thought you'd be okay. You were always strong, even as a child. You never gave up." Emily looked at him, tears spilling freely now. "I wasn't strong, Michael. I was alone," she whispered, voice cracking like a brittle branch. She wiped her tears with her sweater sleeve and added, "Trevor was the only one who helped. He showed up when I was desperate, when I had no idea how to pay bills or keep the farm. He seemed like salvation. But then I found out he's not who he claimed to be." Michael frowned. His heart raced as if standing at the edge of an abyss. "What do you mean? Who is he? What did he do?" Emily shook her head, her gaze filled with a fear Michael couldn't understand. "I can't tell you. Not yet. But Michael, trust me. I never wanted this." Michael studied her, trying to discern whether she was lying or telling the truth. He remembered how honest little Emily had been, how she'd admitted breaking Mom's favorite vase even though she could have blamed him, and Dad had praised her bravery. But now she was different. This woman living in a house too big for liberty, hiding something. He said, "Emily, I'm not leaving until I know the truth. I want to know what happened to the farm, the money, you. If you don't tell me, I'll find answers myself. But I hope you don't make me do it." Emily looked at him, eyes full of pain and something else, fear that seemed to paralyze her. "Okay," she finally said, voice barely a whisper. "But you need to talk to Trevor. He knows more than I do." Michael felt his heart tighten. Trevor, the man he never met yet, who seemed to hold the key to the secret that destroyed their family. Emily offered him to stay over, showed him the guest room with an immaculately made bed and a view of her manicured garden. But Michael refused. He couldn't breathe in this house full of lies, omissions, and borrowed luxury that mocked their past. He walked outside, where the evening Liberty air smelled of freshly mowed grass, distant barbecue smoke, and the dampness of nearby Lake Erie. He got in his car and drove, not to the motel, but to the old farm, led by a pull he couldn't resist. The road felt familiar, as if he'd never left. The turn by the old oak, the dirt track leading to the fields. When he arrived, his heart clenched. The farm was unrecognizable. The red barn still stood, but with peeling paint and a collapsed roof in one section. The fields were overrun with weeds. The apple orchard was gone. Only stumps remaining like tombstones. A sign on the fence read, "Property of Hayes Development, no trespassing." Michael got out, his legs shaking, as if the ground beneath him might give way. He walked through the field, weeds snagging at his jeans, and stopped at the barn. He remembered his father teaching him to fix the tractor there, their laughter when oil splattered on his face. He remembered Emily hiding there upset until he found her nestled in the hay, reading a book. Now the barn was empty. It smelled of damp and abandonment. Michael leaned against the wall, eyes burning with tears he refused to shed. He returned to the car and headed back to the Starlight Motel, but on the way, stopped at Marge's diner, still named after his mother, whose name still hurt him. The smell of coffee, fried burgers, and apple pie hit him like waves of memory. He sat at the counter where he once ate with his father after baseball games, discussing plays, laughing over milkshakes. The old waitress, Margaret, who'd worked there since his childhood, recognized him. "Michael Davis?" she said, her face folding into a smile despite the wrinkles. "It's been years, dear. How are you? I heard Emily's big now in town." Michael forced a smile, though his heart tightened. "Yes, Margaret, she's changed," he said, dodging details. Margaret shook her head as she placed a steaming coffee before him. It smelled just like childhood. "That husband of hers, Trevor, I don't like him. Outsider, building his plans. Folks say he's trying to build half of Liberty, including your old farm. But don't mind gossip, Michael. How are you?" Michael shrugged. His fingers closed around the hot mug. "I don't know, Margaret. Just trying to figure it out." She looked at him with sympathy, sensing his pain, then left to attend to another customer, leaving him with coffee and memories. At the motel, Michael lay on the bed, staring at the ceiling's damp spots, which reminded him of the cracks in his life. He thought of Chicago after his divorce from Kate, how he spent evenings alone, staring at Lake Michigan from his too-big house. Kate left because he couldn't give her what she wanted, a family, warmth, time. He was consumed by work, by ambitions, unaware she drifted away. Now he realized the same happened with Emily. He hadn't noticed her drowning, her life collapsing under debt and loneliness. He thought of his mother, her gentle smile, how she sang hymns at Sunday church, taught them to bake her famous apple pie that made the whole house feel warm even in the coldest winters. He thought of his father, rough hands smelling of dirt and tractor oil, how he was proud of the farm, even with a poor crop yield, how he looked at Michael with hope that turned to disappointment when he left. And he thought of Emily, how she'd changed, how her eyes, once full of trust and dreams, now hid something dark, something that frightened her. The next day, Michael decided to meet Trevor. He drove into downtown Liberty to the Hayes Development office, which looked like an alien object among the old brick buildings with peeling paint and faded signs. The structure was new, with big glass windows, gleaming chrome doors, and a sign shouting money and ambition. He entered and was hit by the scent of expensive perfume and air conditioning. So foreign to Liberty, where everything smelled like earth and diner coffee. The receptionist, a young woman with flawless makeup and a cold smile, looked at him with subtle suspicion, as if he didn't belong in this world of glass and chrome. "Michael Davis," he introduced himself, trying to keep his tone steady. "I need to meet with Trevor Hayes." She arched an eyebrow, but called him in. Minutes later, Trevor emerged, tall, about 45, with perfect haircut in an expensive navy suit, his smile rehearsed, as though he'd practiced winning people over his side. "Michael Davis?" he asked, extending his hand. Voice smooth as silk, but tinged with superiority. "Emily mentioned you. Glad to finally meet." But his eyes were cold, like Lake Erie in winter, and Michael felt a chill run down his spine. He ignored the handshake and said, "We need to talk, Trevor, about the farm and what you've done to my family." Trevor smiled, though it didn't reach his eyes, as if enjoying the confrontation. "Of course, Michael. Let's go into my office," he said, leading him down a corridor flanked by glass walls, behind which employees tapped at keyboards, their faces serious, as if building not homes but an empire. Trevor's office was spacious, overlooking Main Street, where Liberty carried on quietly. On the desk sat a model of a future residential complex. Perfect little homes, green lawns, playgrounds, everything too ideal for this town, where people valued simplicity. Trevor sat behind the desk, motioning Michael into the leather chair opposite. "I know you're upset about the farm," he began, voice calm but steel beneath. "But believe me, I only helped Emily. She was in a difficult situation." Michael clenched his fists, his nails biting into his palms, sending sharp pain. "Difficult? You bought our family farm at half its value. That's not help. That's robbery." Trevor shook his head, his smile widening almost cruelly. "Michael, you don't know the whole picture. The farm was drowning in debt. I offered a solution. Emily agreed. It was business." Michael felt anger surge again, hot waves flooding his chest. "Business? That was our family, our history. And you, who are you? Where did you come from, and why did Emily trust you?" Trevor leaned back, hands steepled, gauging him like a chess player calculating moves. "I understand your feelings, Michael. But maybe you should ask Emily why she made that choice. She hasn't told you everything yet, has she?" Michael froze. Trevor's words were like a knife, twisting into his doubts. He recalled Emily's tremulous voice and her warning. "I learned things I shouldn't have known." So what hadn't she told him? What did Trevor know? Michael leaned forward, voice low, almost threatening. "I'm asking you, Trevor, what did you do with the farm? And what are you doing with my sister?" Trevor's eyes narrowed, and for a moment, Michael glimpsed something dark behind the confident businessman's facade. Someone who knew too much and wasn't afraid to play with other people's lives. Trevor Hayes's office was sterile and cold, despite the warm June light pouring through the vast glass windows facing Main Street in Liberty, Ohio. Michael Davis sat in the leather chair, his fists clenched so tightly that his nails cut into his palms, leaving burning red crescents he barely noticed. Trevor, with his rehearsed smile and eyes cold as the ice crust on Lake Erie in January, leaned back, his fingers laced as though he held the threads of Michael's fate in his hands. His words, "Maybe you should ask Emily why she made that choice," hung in the air like smoke from a campfire Michael and his friends used to light by the lake, where stars reflected in dark water and laughter drowned out, longing for a future that once seemed bright. Michael leaned forward, his voice low, almost threatening, as it trembled with restrained fury. "I'm asking you, Trevor. What did you do with our farm? What are you doing with my sister? And don't feed me your business fairy tales. I saw how she's afraid, and I know you're hiding something dirty." Trevor looked at him, his eyes narrowed, and for a moment, Michael saw something dark in them. Not just the confidence of a businessman, but a predatory calculation, as though he played with people's lives like chess pieces, always making the final move. Slowly, Trevor smiled, His voice was smooth like the surface of Lake Michigan on a windless day, but in it lay steel, sharp and cold. "Michael, you're dramatizing too much. The farm was in debt. Emily was desperate. I offered a solution, a simple deal, beneficial for everyone. She agreed. Nothing personal. It's business. Liberty needs progress." Michael felt fury erupt in his chest, flooding him like hot waves, as though someone had set fire to the dry grass in their old fields. "Nothing personal?" he repeated incredulously, voice shaking with rage, climbing to a shout, echoing off the glass walls. "This was our family, our history. Great-grandpa bought this land when Liberty was a dirt road village with one shop. Dad lived for it, rising before dawn to fix the tractor, even when his back failed him, even when he coughed from the dust. Mom made apple jam, and the whole house smelled like cinnamon, as if that was heaven. And you bought the farm for half its worth, and now it stands empty, with your company's sign on it like a grave. You destroyed what they built for a lifetime, and now you sit here in this office like it's just numbers on paper." Trevor shrugged, his smile unmoved as though Michael's words were meaningless noise. "Michael, the world changes. Liberty is changing. People like your father held on to the past. Fields, barns, apple trees, but the future is development. Residential complexes, shopping centers, jobs. Your farm will become part of something greater. Progress that will pull this town out of the last century." Michael rose. His fists trembled as though he was about to overturn the desk behind which Trevor sat with such composure. "Part of your profit, you mean?" he snarled, voice hoarse with rage. "And what about Emily? Why is she afraid of you? I saw her eyes, Trevor. She's not just your wife, she's your hostage. What did you do to her?" Trevor raised an eyebrow, his smile widening, as though Michael had said something amusing, not worth his attention. "Afraid? Emily? She's my wife, Michael. She made a choice. She wanted this life. A big house, status, security, council receptions. Maybe you should ask her why she's clinging to all this. I gave her what she wanted, something Liberty would never have given her. Or do you think she dreamed her whole life of sorting library books and living in a leaking roof-old house?" Michael felt ice race down his spine, as though someone had opened a window on a winter day and let in a frigid wind. He remembered the look in Emily's eyes in her living room, fear mixed with guilt, her trembling voice. "I learned things I shouldn't have known." He stepped closer to the desk, voice dropping, edged with steel as though restraining a storm. "If you did something to my sister, Trevor, I will find out, and you will regret ever coming to this town. I won't leave until I understand." Trevor studied him. His eyes were impassible like glass. But a shadow flickered, calculating to see how far Michael would go, and if he was worth fearing. "Threats, Michael?" he asked, calmly, derisively, as though he was playing a game he already knew the end of. "That won't help. Go home. Talk to Emily. She'll tell you what she needs. Or maybe she'll tell you why she doesn't want you digging deeper. Think, Michael. Is it worth destroying her life for your version of the truth?" He pressed a button on his phone, and the secretary entered, heels clicking against the polished floor like a metronome marking Michael's remaining time. "Escort Mr. Davis out," Trevor said, without taking his eyes off Michael, as though seeing him not just out of his office, but out of his game, where Trevor was king. Michael left the building, his heart pounding, as though he'd run a mile across their old farm fields, where he once raced Emily, giggling until their father wagged his finger at them for stolen apples. Liberty's streets looked the same. Faded signs above diners and shops, the smell of coffee and fresh bread from Marge's, children riding bicycles in the park across the street, where he and Emily had laughed until tears on the carousel as their mother called them home. But now, everything felt foreign, as though the town of his childhood was a set hiding something dark, something Trevor had injected like poison, corrupting wherever he touched. He climbed into his car, knuckles whitening as he gripped the wheel, trying to hold on to something real. He didn't drive straight to Emily. He wasn't ready for another confrontation, for more tears, for hidden truths tearing him apart. Instead, he headed to the old farm, guided by an internal pull, as though the land where he grew up might offer answers Trevor left unsaid, and comfort Trevor never offered. The road was familiar, a long-forgotten song whose words he didn't remember, but whose melody echoed in his bones. The turn by the old oak, its branches still arching like arms embracing a traveler. The dirt track leading to fields that once swayed gold under summer sun. But when he arrived, his heart seized, as though someone crushed his last drop of hope. The farm was unrecognizable, as though time and indifference had erased it from the earth's face. The red barn still stood, but peeling paint had exposed weathered gray boards. The roof had collapsed in one spot, and walls cracked like wrinkles on an old man's face. The fields were choked with ragged, thorny weeds that rustled mockingly in the wind. The apple orchard where he and Emily once stole fruit, giggling until their mother noticed, had been cleared. Only stumps remained, like gravestones, surrounded by weeds and dry grass. A sign on the fence read, "Property of Hayes Development, for sale." Michael climbed out, legs trembling as though the ground might swallow him whole, taking his pain with it. He walked through the field, weeds snagging his jeans, scratching his skin, and stopped by the barn. The stale scent of damp and abandonment hit him, but he could still see ghosts of the past. His father repairing the old tractor inside, rough hands smelling of oil, grumbling whenever Michael handed in the wrong tool, but eyes shining with pride when his son learned. He saw Emily, nestled in the hay with a book, her glasses sliding down her nose, softly reading pirate stories and dreams. He remembered their laughter while hiding from rain, hatching plans for futures that once seemed so real. Michael pressed his palm against the rough wall, tears burning in his eyes. He had not cried at his parents' funeral, but now he could not hold back. "Why didn't you tell me?" he whispered to the ghosts of Jack and Marge. "Why did you choose her? And why, Emily, did you let this happen?" He returned to the car, mind a web of tangled wires, like in that old barn where he once hid from his father after sneaking off to the lake with friends. He thought of Chicago, his empty divorce house, evenings spent in front of the TV, with baseball reruns to drown silence, microwaved dinners, smelling of plastic. He believed he had succeeded, construction manager, building skyscrapers, a Lakeview home. But now he saw that success was empty, like this barn, like his life without family. Kate once said, "Michael, you're running away from everything that matters." He'd laughed and brushed it off, but now her words echoed like an indictment. He had left Liberty to prove to his father he could be better, but lost everything that made him who he was. He drove to Emily's house, deciding he would no longer wait. He would make her tell the truth, even if it broke them both, even if it was the last thing binding them as brother and sister. Emily opened the door, her face pale, eyes red from crying all day, hair in a careless bun, and, instead of the cashmere sweater of her new life, she wore the old, worn-out sweater she'd had in school, as though seeking comfort in the past. "Michael?" she said, voice trembling, as though afraid he'd come with new accusations to finish her off. "You're back?" He stepped inside without waiting for an invitation and sat in the living room, clutching the Cleveland Indians cap like a talisman. returning him to simpler days. The living room still looked magazine perfect. Leather sofas, gilt-framed paintings, a crystal chandelier casting patterns on the walls. But now it felt cold, like a museum of someone else's memories, not their shared history. Michael looked at Emily. His voice was steady, but held a threat, as if containing a storm that could tear everything apart. I was at Trevor's. He said you made a choice, that you wanted this life, this house, this status, these receptions. Emily, what's really going on? What are you hiding? I saw the farm. It's destroyed, erased, as if wiped from the face of the earth. And I see you. You're afraid of him. Why? What did he do to you? Emily sank onto the sofa opposite him, hands trembling as though afraid her words would shatter the remnants of their family like glass. She looked at him, eyes full of tears but seasoned with resolve, as though she'd grown weary of hiding behind silence. All right, Michael, she said, voice steadied, though still quavering like a leaf in wind. I'll tell you everything, but you have to promise not to do anything foolish. Trevor, he's dangerous. I don't want you getting hurt. Michael frowned. His heart raced as he stood at the brink of a chasm staring into darkness. Dangerous? How? What did he do? Emily took a deep breath, fingers clutching the sweater's hem so tightly her knuckles whitened. She began in a quiet voice, each word heavy like stone. After their parents' death, Emily was left alone with the farm's debt, nearly $200,000 their father had hidden, taken in loans to weather crop failures, equipment repairs, and their mother's medical bills as her memory faded. She found the papers in his desk, hidden under yellowed farming magazines, as though he was ashamed of his failure. She tried running the farm, hiring a few workers from the nearby town. But the harvest failed, the tractor broke down, and she didn't know how to handle finances, taxes, suppliers. She was desperate, waking nightly from nightmares of the bank seizing the farm and herself ending up with nothing. Trevor arrived in Liberty as an investor, promising to revive the town, housing, jobs, a future that would pull Liberty out of decline like countless small towns in Ohio. He was charismatic, confident. His speeches about progress sounded like salvation to Emily. Exhausted by loneliness and fear, she believed him. He offered to buy the farm to cover debts, and she consented, thinking it was temporary, that they'd buy it back when she got back on her feet. They married months later. Emily thought she'd found her rescue. But one day, while tidying his home office, she discovered documents in a locked drawer he'd left ajar. The farm had sold to his company for half its value, $100,000, though it was worth 4 times that, and then resold to another firm at full price, netting Trevor hundreds of thousands in profit. She also found papers linking him to shady deals in Columbus, money laundering through real estate, shell companies, bribes to local officials. When she tried to leave, Trevor threatened to expose her role in selling the farm, accusing her of complicity, suggesting that those who crossed him had accidents. He showed her a newspaper article about a Columbus businessman who died in a suspicious car crash. Michael listened, his face turning to stone with each word, as if he'd become a statue, incapable of movement, while a storm raged inside him. His hands trembled, not from fear, but from anger rising like a volcano. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked, voice hoarse as though he hadn't slept, each word laced with pain. "I could have helped, Emily. I was your brother. I would have come. I'd have found a way." Tears streaked down her cheeks. "I was in Chicago, Michael. I called. I wrote. You never replied. I sent letters begging you to come, but you were too busy. Work, your life. I thought you didn't care. And I was afraid of Trevor. He said he'd ruin me if I told. He knew how to manipulate, how to make me feel guilty, as if I were the one to blame." Michael felt guilt ripping him apart like a knife twisting in his heart. He remembered ignoring her messages, being too absorbed in his life, work, divorce, bills, loneliness, to notice her despair. He remembered Kate saying, "Michael, you're running from everything that matters." He laughed it off, but now her words echoed as a judgment, a verdict. "Emily," he said, voice breaking like a dry branch underfoot. "I'm sorry. I didn't know. I let you down. I let Mom and Dad down. But I'm here now. We'll sort this out. I promise." They sat in silence, broken only by the ticking clock on the mantel, one Emily had bought at a flea market to fill emptiness in this house. Michael looked at his sister, childhood images flickering in his mind. Emily chasing him through the fields, her braids bouncing, laughter when he tossed her in the air, their blanket fort in the living room where they whispered dreams, her tears when he left for Chicago, and her question, "Will you come back, Mike?" He didn't then, and guilt was a weight he'd carried ever since. "What do we do now?" he asked finally, voice soft like speaking to that little girl who had trusted him above all. Emily wiped her tears on her sweater and said, "We need Bobby. He's a lawyer. He can untangle the paperwork." "But Michael, this is going to be dangerous. Trevor won't let it go quietly." They decided to go to Bobby Clark, Michael's high school friend now practicing law in Columbus, frequently visiting Liberty to help local folks with legal troubles. Michael and Emily drove to his office, a cramped second-floor space in an old building piled with folders, coffee cups, and newspapers, smelling of ink and cheap diner coffee. Bobby, his eyes tired yet with the same kind grin from their school days when they ran off to the lake for fishing, listened while paging through the documents Emily brought from Trevor's house. His ink-stained fingers trembled as he read about the shell companies and shady deals. "This is serious, Mike," he said, his voice heavy like he carried bad news. "The farm deal looks like outright fraud. I've traced shell companies Trevor used to launder money through real estate in Columbus, but we need solid proof before the police will act, and Emily must testify under oath. This won't be easy. Trevor knows how to cover his tracks, and he's connected." Emily nodded, pale but resolute, as though she'd finally shed the chains of fear that restrained her for years. "I'll do it," she said, voice quiet but firm, like she'd rediscovered her long-lost strength. "I'm done being afraid. I want my life back, even if it's all I have left." Michael looked at her, pride and pain mingling in his chest like bittersweet coffee. He remembered how as a child, Emily had been brave despite her small frame and big glasses, standing up for younger kids when bullies teased them, owning up to pranks even if it meant punishment from their father. Now he saw the same courage, tempered by years of suffering, loneliness, and betrayal. "We'll do this, Emily," he said, voice soft as if speaking to the little girl who once hid under blankets during storms, shaking with fear. "Together. I won't leave anymore." Emily met his gaze, eyes shining with tears, but holding hope. Weak as the first glimmer of sunshine after a long night. She reached out her hand, and Michael squeezed it, feeling the warmth of her fingers as though they were children again, holding on to each other in the dark. They returned to Emily's house to gather more documents she'd hidden inside a suitcase under the guest room bed, where dust settled like a thin veil of forgetfulness. But when they entered the living room, Trevor was there, standing by the window, hands in the pockets of his expensive navy suit, his smile cold as lake ice, his eyes glinting like a predator that had cornered its prey. "Emily," he said, voice soft but laced with menace like a serpent's hiss. "You're not really planning anything foolish, are you? And you, Michael, should leave before things get worse. Liberty is small, easy to stumble in." Michael stepped forward, fists clenched as though ready to strike, heart pounding so hard it drowned out everything. "Stay away from her, Trevor," he growled, voice deep and threatening. "We know what you did. We know about the farm, your deals in Columbus. We have proof, and you'll answer for it." Trevor laughed, his eyes dark as night, but with a flicker of fear, as though he realized his game was unraveling. "You think you can stop me?" he said, calm but venomous. You have nothing, Michael. No farm, no family, no proof. And Emily? She knows what happens if she talks. Don't you, dear? He turned to her, his smile a knife, but Emily didn't back down. Stepping forward, voice trembling but resolute, as though unlocking herself from years of fear, she said, I do, and I'll tell everything. About the farm, your deals, everything. I'm not your puppet any longer, and I will speak. Trevor stared at her, his smile faded, and Michael saw fear in his eyes for the first time. Real fear, as though he realized he was losing control, that his empire built on lies was beginning to crumble. That evening, Michael and Emily handed the papers to Bobby, who started building a case against Trevor, contacting Columbus police and the local district attorney, an old friend of their father. They met with Margaret at Marge's diner, where the smell of apple pie and coffee filled the air like memories of better days. Margaret embraced Emily, tears shining in her eyes, hands trembling as she held her. You're brave, honey, she said, voice warm like fresh pie. Your mother would be so proud. And you, Michael, you came home finally. Michael looked at Emily, his heart tightening with love and pain. He remembered how they used to steal cookies from the jar while Mom wasn't watching, build blanket forts in the living room, and he taught her to ride the bike by holding the frame until she learned balance, falling and laughing. He lost her for years when he left for Chicago, leaving her alone with their sick parents. But now she was here, and he would never let her slip away again. A week later, Trevor vanished from Liberty as Columbus police launched their investigation, based on Emily's testimony and the documents Bobby submitted. Rumor said he fled to another state. His company was frozen and accounts under audit. They couldn't reclaim the farm. It had been sold again, and residential construction was already underway. But Emily filed for divorce and returned to the local library, sorting books and helping kids with homework, just like in her youth, when she dreamed of being a writer. Michael stayed in Liberty, deciding never to return to the empty Chicago house where loneliness awaited. He began restoring their parents' farmhouse, painting walls, fixing the creaky porch, planting new apple trees in the garden where he and Emily once raced. Every morning he drank coffee on the porch, looking out at fields now owned by others, but still holding his memories. He felt the past's pain recede, making room for hope, gentle but warm like the June sun. He realized that family wasn't land, money, or even the farm. It was the people he nearly lost, and now he was ready to protect them as he failed to before.